Hi, good morning, and welcome to the session today in which we're covering the unit Managing Communication. We are at a stage where we've covered 3 learning outcomes on this particular unit, and today we are going to cover the last one, which basically talks about reviewing communication within an organization. So we are going to be looking at some interesting things with regards to how a communication audit is done. We'll also look at some of the, problems that we face in the workplace, which basically then will look at, things like how to improve those issues or workplace communications. Now, before I get to learning outcome 4, what I want to do is have a brief recap on what we've covered so far in terms of the first 3 learning outcomes. Now, in the first one, what we did was in this particular unit, we basically looked at understanding how information and knowledge is essentially, communicated within the organization. What is the need for information and knowledge, and how this need for information and knowledge is basically different for different stakeholders. We also then looked at understanding how, you look at different mediums of communication in terms of knowledge and information going across to stakeholders, whether it's written, verbal, non-verbal, and, sometimes it also utilizes technology. And then we looked at potential barriers of, communication, which could also be affecting, the flow of communication or information happening within the organization to the stakeholders. In the second learning outcome, we looked at, studying the various factors which have an impact on workplace communication. And these factors included factors like the organizational structure, the culture, and the value of the organization, how technology has become an enabler in communication nowadays, and how this can be then used to, send, receive communication effectively within an organization. We looked at some of the hindrances sometimes which can be caused because of technology or failures in technology, and how this then hinders the communication process. Lastly, in learning outcome 2, we briefly covered things like policies and procedures which organization have, and if you are interested with the responsibility of being a spokesperson, or you are sending out communication from within the organization, you sometimes see organizations, businesses have handbooks, staff handbooks, things like that, and which tend to be fall into something called the policies and procedures when you are communicating on behalf of a business or a company, when you utilize formal processes of communication. In the third learning outcome, we looked at basically and paid emphasis on something called interpersonal communication, and this is where we discuss things like face-to-face communication, meetings that you have, briefings that you have, and we looked at communication skills. We looked at a bit of a SWOT that I suggested that you need to be able to do on your strengths and weaknesses on communication first, and then look at asking somebody in your friends and family to be able to do a skills audit in order for you to be able to identify the gap areas from SWOT, and then also from the skills audit, and then put that into some sort of a personal development plan. I did send you a bit of a handout on interpersonal theories of communication, and this is the theoretical bit which is required to be included in learning outcome 3. There are various theories of interpersonal communication, and what I did was I sent you a bit of a handout to look at least 3, so that at least you're aware that how these theories work, how they've evolved over the years, and how they are then used in the modern context in the business or in an organization. Lastly, what we are looking at doing is primarily, in the learning outcome 4, we are going to be looking at doing a review of how communication strategy or communication as a process works within an organization. And here the idea would be to look at something like a communications audit. How does somebody who manage, say for example, when you look at people within the organization who work specifically within the communication or comms department, as we call it, they look at the utilization of procedures and processes, and also look at, for example, consistency across different forms of communication when it is done from an organizational perspective, and that takes the formal route. So we will look at the understanding of how to do a communication audit, look at a particular template that I have as an example, for you to be able to look into and then pick up an organization to do a communication audit, to look at, the formal lines of communication, also to look at, understanding things like, say, for example, what is the scope, the objectives, and then how this communication is then done at various levels within the organization in terms of stakeholders like the managing director, the sales staff, the mid-management, the junior management, the professional staff, and obviously the working staff. And then what you need to do in that particular audit would be to try and understand and ask the same questions to see if everyone in the organization has the same perspective and the same understanding on what that means. So things like mission and vision should translate into the same, you should have the same meaning when it is asked from different people within the organization. We will also look at something called, workplace communication processes. Sometimes we do see within the organization there are lots of issues, conflicts which arise, and then what we want to be able to do is use some of these policies and procedures to be able to solve these, issues or problems that we get to have within workplace communication. And lastly, what we will look at is we'll basically look at the process of evaluation, to see how and what kind of, communication do actually work when we look at, a particular business or a workplace. Now, in this particular learning outcome, one of the key things that we will cover first using PowerPoint slides, which I will start on now, would be to understand the various theories of organizational communication. In learning outcome 3, we studied theories of interpersonal communication, and in this particular learning outcome, what we're going to be doing is basically studying something called the theories of, organizational communication. So this is the bit that we will start off with first, and then we will get on with some of the others, in which I will show you some formats and templates which can be used to solving or addressing workplace problems, and also how to do a communications audit. So let's start with the presentation. Now, there are 3 classical theories of communication within an organization, and they were Taylor's theory of scientific management, Faisal's theory of administrative theory, and then we have Weber's theory of bureaucracy. So these 3 theories over the years have undergone a lot of change, but let's understand the bit of a overview. Now, when we look at in general, when we talk about Taylor's theory of communication, what we did see that he observed that over the years, a lot of organizations, have created a lot of processes, they have information, data, knowledge, whether it's directly, indirectly, in different, utilizing different methods, which would be non-verbal, written communication, verbal, non-verbal communication, or written written messages. And this then tend to be kind of, understood to portray, various things like, tasks and goals within the organization. So here the core theme was that it is primarily centered around passing the message over, or sending the message across the different types of people within the organization. Now, the assumption in this particular theory was that communication is central to the existence of the organization. You will see that there are some companies or some businesses in which there is a lot which rides on communication. An example that I will give you is, for example, when you look at a company which is involved in customer services or operations, you will see that here the speed at which the communication happens, the accuracy of communication, and how much information is available at what level determines the success and the closure of the objectives within the organization. So here it will be safe to say that communication is central to the existence of the organization. You will also see that organizational communication sometimes is a complex process. That means there are people which create the message, there are people which translate and transmit the message, and there are people which basically receive it, interpret it, and then execute that message, implement this message. So that is why in this case the assumption is that the process of communication across the organization is a complex process. And sometimes you will see that because of the use of what we saw in theories of interpersonal communication, use of jargons, acronyms, technical terms, sometimes some people can also have a misunderstanding of what the message is, and because of which sometimes misunderstandings are defined as something which is what we will say is instances where people who have received communication do not yet understand the meaning of the situation or for which it has been communicated. So here it tends to kind of affect the efficiency and efficiency of the organization, and to a certain extent affects the achievement of the overall goals and objectives. So we will define misunderstanding with an example that sometimes if your boss, for example, or your line manager in the organization essentially says that these are the 3 tasks which need to be done today, but he does not define, for example, the task which is urgent and important or which needs to be done first and then followed by others. Now, his assumption is that when he gives the task over to you, you'll be able to, kind of understand and decipher from that this is important and that needs to be delivered first. But when he checks with you during the course of the day or towards the end of the day, he finds that you have done the task which was least important first, and then the others are still pending. So here, the misunderstanding primarily happens because because he wasn't very clear in terms of communicating what was required to be done first, but also because his idea was that you will understand, but in this case, obviously, you have interpreted the information that is provided to you slightly differently, and this then leads to something called misunderstanding. Constructs that we look at when we look at Taylor's theory of scientific approach. Sorry, the 3 important constructs. One is, it kind of relates to something called the organization identification, which is the process and the product. It also relates to something called job satisfaction, and the third part will be communication satisfaction. So the organizational process and product is defined as, basically the core of the identity of the organization. So here, everyone who works within the company understands what processes the company follows, what are the products and services it provides, who are the main customers and the stakeholders. And in that sense, all individuals have a very good understanding of what they're expected to do when it comes to organizational process of communication. Now, in terms of this translates into job satisfaction, here the employees who receive communication feel fulfilled in their job and are able to execute that properly because their understanding of what is being expected from them in terms of process and delivery is actually happening, and because of which they are generally seen to be happy employees within the organization. Now, if for some reason you do not see that happening and you have misunderstandings in the sense that you're not able to interpret information correctly, you will see that this then links to something called absenteeism or people leaving the organization because they feel that the management expects and communicates one thing, but they expect something other. And because of the mismatch, you will see that negative effect of this is that the employees end up leaving. The third construct is basically that here in terms of the channel and the message is appropriate in terms of communication, and what generally is seen is that the information provided by the manager or the management is generally reaching the individuals, and because of which they are able to complete their jobs effectively. There is something which we look at, which is called the Communications Satisfaction Index, and this is basically consisting of 8 factors, which basically define if the whole process is taking place within a conducive atmosphere. That means the message is right, the channel to communicate the message is right or conducive, and the climate in which, that means the temperament, tone, and the reception of the message which is happening in this particular climate is absolutely optimum. So these 8 factors, which are then broken down and kind of help in the speedier, effective, and efficient process of communication, are called factors of communication satisfaction, or CSQ. Now here, these factors are elaborated and bulleted down, mention them in terms of the bullet here. They include things like climate, relationships to your supervisors, how closely you are working within the organization, what kind of the message that you receive, what is the quality of it. That means if you receive an email face-to-face, a video, a memo, or written notice, whatever it is, whether the message is coming from horizontal or informal communication. That means is it coming from your peer or somebody who's a colleague with you within the department or the organization, and your relationships with subordinate, and also personal feedback. Sometimes you will see within the organization is that if you're sitting in a meeting and you do not understand something, instead of cross-checking or asking a question, what you tend to do is you ask a colleague over your shoulder, sitting beside you, to say, okay, I didn't understand that, or I missed it. Could you help me get that meaning, or can you get me to understand that, rather than asking a question to the manager. So this then depends on something which is your relationship with your subordinates, and also, you know, how good you are in terms of communication with people that work on a daily. Now, the primary goal in all organizational communication theories will be to look at reducing misunderstandings through communication. Now, communication is a complex process. Sometimes you will hear that, you know, it is an art, it is a complex process. Sometimes if the channel is not right, or if the communication does not reach you on time, or for example, if the meaning or the message of the communication is ambiguous, it can lead to misunderstandings. So the primary goal is to look at understandings. And here, these three theories actually then come into play to basically look at showing how this problem is addressed. Now, sometimes this question is asked if as a business, as a company, when it becomes too large, when you have too many employees working within the organization. If I choose an example of a company like ATHE or one of the retailers, what you will see is that as an organization, they have thousands of employees. Now, if you imagine in this, if the HR manager or if somebody in the organization, like a manager, has to send important message across, and if that message does not go across to all the employees in the organization and they do not get that as the same meaning, then look at the potential problems the organization, you know, face. So here, these three theories that we are going to look at will primarily, you know, focus on things like the functions, and here they tend to describe, explain, predict, and control the approach in which the message will be received, you know, what kind of an effect it will have, and then how you will be able to predict and control the you know, effect of that particular message amongst the audience. So the classical theories basically look at approaching, you know, them through the organizational management, and also look at predicting and controlling the behavior for the message. So here, the first one, which we look at, the Taylor's theory, actually emerged in the 20th century. There were models which were primarily used initially, you know, with the military and the Catholic Church. And here the idea was to have strict control of the message, and so that, and what kind of an effect it could have on workers, or, you know, the chain of command. That means people who were responsible for sending or delivering this message, and then they try to predict, understand what kind of a reaction that message will bring, and because of which they then looked at, you know, basically doctoring the message before it was sent, and all these parameters of, you know, looking at reduction of understanding and the basis of, you know, describing, explaining, predicting, and controlling the response to the message was actually looked at. Now, this form of communication is considered unidirectional. That means it is normally top, and then, you know, there's very little feedback which actually comes on, because what they do is they try to anticipate the feedback before it's the message is sent out, and that is where you know, in this case, the feedback required or coming back is minimal. And these kind of communication tend to be, you know, messages about the company. For example, if there's a new CEO being appointed in the company, the message coming across from the HR department will be unidirectional, because you don't have any play into the recruitment of the chief executive officer, and this is more or less like an announcement which is for your information. So here they would then look at, you know, something like a unidirectional message. This is where, you know, get that across into the. Now, sometimes you will see that there are some, you know, there are some, say, for example, you know, metaphors in the message. Now, the metaphor is, how do you define the word metaphor? The metaphor, you know, as a word, is basically a figure of speech that directly refers to one thing by mentioning another for a rhetorical effect. That means it may provide, you know, a bit of clarity, or, you know, it may tend to identify some hidden similarities between two ideas. So sometimes you will see that, you know, when we look at metaphors, you know, metaphors, the use of metaphors in the English literature, you know, is basically about, you know, first of all, you know, mostly it was used by William Shakespeare, say, for example, in the poetry and stuff. But the idea was to primarily look at, you know, relating two things by showing some hidden similarities. So what we do get to see is that there are the classical theories, you know, essentially focus on something called relevancy and metaphor. And here what they do look at is that these classical theories basically, you know, wanted to understand, you know, how the organizations function, and what role does the communication play in making it effective. So the metaphor was basically treated as something divided into the understanding in terms of what organizations viewed the communication channel as in terms of machinery, what were the properties of this comms channel or the machinery, and the last was how the application of communication channels could be done within the organization. So when we look at classical theories, their overarching aim is to look at minimizing understanding, and again there the main thing was to look at, when we look at a lot of people working within factories after the post-World War II era, what we did see that the communication had to be something which had to have a standardized message. It had to add a bit of predictability, because there were a lot of people, say for example, working within the companies or manufacturing sites. So unionization and union structures came about. So they wanted to send, before they sent a message out, or say for example they were looking at laying off a number of workers, before the message was sent out, it was basically looked at from a management standpoint of view to look at what would be the predictable response. And when they wanted to, the idea was they wanted to tone down the response, or have a certain type of prediction happening in terms, have a certain type of response coming in. They wanted to see and predict, what kind of response that announcement would kind of elicit. So obviously there were strict rules and regulations around that kind of communication, and this meant that most of the information at the management level was, at the top management level, was kept close to their chest. And to a certain extent, what we did feel that when some of the messages were sent out, they were quite clearly controlled to have a very controlled response among various people. Now this is a bit of a background. So let's summarize this. Frederick Taylor basically looked at coming out with this theory. He's considered as the father of scientific management. He's the one who basically looked at proposing that we need to be able to maximize profits from people while working in factories. He said that the employees need to work at their maximum capacity, and he treated employees primarily, if you look at the hard and soft approach of HRM, he treated employees as one of the resources, and he said that we need to be able to get the maximum capacity or maximum output efficiency from them. Now here his reasons of basically looking at proposing this theory was that some of the things that we do are basically nothing but science, and sometimes it is careful selection and planning of certain of these things, which then allows us to produce work or become more productive or increase the output. And here he did feel that he needed to employ, or the organizations needed to employ, managers which were generally intelligent than workers, and they basically wanted to achieve these managers or people who work within those positions were motivated by financial incentives, and they could then in turn translate effectively the communication required to workers to get the output, desired output. So here the idea was maximum effort led to higher wages or higher incentives. We see the application of Taylor's theory in the modern workplace, and you'll see that sometimes you see this point of some of these points enacted in this theory being applied to engineering organizations, or where change management is to be done, or for example when lean manufacturing in places wherein we have to look at reworking on some of the things in order to kind of re-engineer them to start making them work to a particular level. So here the focus is primarily on what you call getting the maximum output, or maximum say for example output from the workers. So places like when we say lean manufacturing is nothing but lean production, which means that we basically look at making us we make use of what you call processes which allow the systems or the organization in general, the factories, to produce less waste, or for example less waste in terms of resources. So basically less waste of resources, and it takes into account that if there is a lot of waste being created within the process of manufacturing, or any sort of work that is done within factories, then that means that there is uneven workload on different type of workers or places within the factory, and that then leads to a decline in productivity, profits, and also leads to low value being returned from customers. So the other part of the theory which came across was Fayol's administrative theory, and he was basically he advocated the concept of industrial management, and he said some of the principles and elements of management, how managers should be able to accomplish their duty, should be applied in this context. So his focus primarily was management as against the primary focus of which his primarily looked into management, and he said that managers could get more respect from the workers if they were able to motivate the workers well, and were able to kind of take care of their workers. So here the approach was more prescriptive than being descriptive, and this approach then was something which was which was adopted in the early 1900s, and focused on management and being prescriptive. Now he identified 5 elements of management, which he said that if managers were able to plan well, organize things well, have a chain of command, or earn the respect from the workers, and then that led to better coordination and control in terms of the department or the things that they were in charge of. And this kept the machinery effective and efficient, because the manager was directly aware of the needs and wants of the workers. At the same time, the manager was more respectful and caring about the needs and wants of his workers in terms of team members. And here the idea was to replace quickly and efficiently any part or process that did not contribute to the objective. So he believed that if something was not working, then that was meant to be changed, replaced, and if that was fixed in time, then this could lead to productivity and obviously control in terms of working with the workers. More better control in terms of better control for managers in terms of working with his team of workers. Now he came across with the 14 principles of management, and they are obviously defined here. These are principles that you get to see that we use in modern day organizations. For example, union and strength is one of the things that we do get to see. Equality and diversity, equal kindliness and justice. So some of these things laid down the foundations for some of the policies that we do get to see within organizations and the legislation which came across in the parliament. So he came out with these 14, obviously just take understanding. And then he said that is one of the necessary ingredients. If you don't have a line of communication or a proper channel between the management and the workers, you will see that the work and work does not get done, efficiency cannot be achieved, and obviously productivity and output gets affected. Now this part of this part of the theory, basically what we do is we see that a lot of organizations which have a lot of labor force, they put this into practice in the modern day context because they want to be they want to have the workers being happy. They want the workers to be satisfied and get the job satisfaction at the end of the day when they work for the company. And you will see that this is applicable in very large scale organizations, primarily because here the primary objective is to maintain cordial relations with the workers, and at the same point in time get feedback to the leadership in order for them or the management, in terms of the management, to get the processes to work. The last, Weber's theory of bureaucracy, and he was a German sociologist. Now he came across with the theory of social and economic organization in the early in the late 1940s, just after the World War. And his idea was that he described that the management was primarily set up to deal with what you call some sort of an organizational structure. So his primary focus was structure. He said that within an organization, if the structure is not there and there is no hierarchy within the organization, then it will be difficult for the organization to achieve productivity, efficiency, and the output. So here he said the workers should respect the right of the managers to direct the activities, because they are put in that position because of their experience and their skill set, and because of which he felt that this approach, if there is mutual respect and if there is respect given to managers who have been in those positions, would then help the organization better, achieve objectives better. He said that the bureaucracy allows for the optimal form of authority, which means that if you allow the managers to do their work, then at some stage what will happen is that the organization is able to achieve more in terms of output, and more in terms of let's say more in terms of output from the workers. Now, the word bureaucracy, if I have to just define that, just to simplify this, would be that it refers to a body of non-elected government officials and an administrative policy making group. That means within the organization, he felt that before you look at let's look at an organization. You look at a company like, for example, going back to ATHE. Now you look at a company like ATHE, which is a large retailer in the UK, part of Walmart Group. What we do get to see is that within this company, you have a lot of management structures. These management structures are instituted because they want to be involved in, because there are lots of people who work within the organization. There are stores, they have people within the head office, branch offices, regional offices, different stores across the country, about 2,000 plus stores. So the idea here is that they set up what you call the non-administrative working groups or management structures, which allow these structures to create policies, procedures, or create what you call the working policies, procedures of how the stores will be run, how the offices will be run, how purchasing will be done, or basically the procedures which are set. Now, in this case, what tends to happen is this particular body or the management group is then managed, is then responsible for managing the various departments. So an example here would be that you look at in ATHE, there will be different departments like HR, administration, security, warehousing, purchasing, marketing, sales, stores, store service teams, customer service. Now these are all large departments. Now this setting up of these large departments will help manage store operations or the various type of operations which happen in different locations of the ATHE store. So here this bureaucracy, in the sense that these departmental structures which have been put into place by the organization, helps them better manage and administer this large company or the large sections of the business of the company. And this is then, because Walmart is, for example, owned, by shareholders, or it's a traded company, but it could be both in the hands of, public or privately owned. But yes, at the end of the day, this structure, this centralized hierarchical structure reporting into the head office or branch office, allows the firm to, achieve its goals and objectives. So there is a channel through which this theory advocates that there is a way through which large organizations can function effectively, well, and be productive, is if they are able to establish these channels of, authority, and these channels of authority then allow different departments and other activities in the company to be controlled effectively. His ideal structure, he obviously proposed certain ideal structures, but the main idea that he proposed was that if there is a large setup and a large organization or any such function which has to be managed, he said that we need to be able to establish legitimate control or authority mechanisms within the company, and then those who are defined as traditional, charismatic, and rational, and then they were then made responsible for the company. Now, Weber's theory in modern workplace, if you look at large organizations, they have lots of. If you look at a multinational organization, and in this case, if I change focus from ASDA to Tesco, for example, Tesco is present in 14 different countries. It has regional structures, regional vice presidents, country directors, and lots of suppliers, partners, customers across these countries in which it operates. Now, because the organization has to comply with a lot of legislation, laws, labor laws and other things related to a particular country in which they function, this organization is definitely under the definition of a large organization and has to be guided by a lot of laws, legislation operating within a country. Now, in order for this organization to work and effectively work and produce profits, for example, return on investment or dividend per share, if it has to be returned, then this organization has to set up what you call is, the administrative, departments or authority, administrative centers of authority, which will then apply this on a traditional, charismatic or, rational way and link it to the objectives of, the department and the organization for them to achieve those goals. So here you will see that in this case, organizations, multinationals which work across geographies have kind of a structure, and this then they tend to create department heads. These controlling departments or head offices then manage and guide the the activities of the organization. So in this case, the idea is that using these three classical theories, what we are looking at is some of them advocate task-based approach, some of them advocate management-based approach, and then looks at organizational structure approach. Some of them are prescriptive, some of them are descriptive, and when you look at this particular approach, the idea primarily is to look at enhancing what you call the the role of communication and the role of management in communication to make sure that the communication done is understood. It then translates into effective behavior and obviously leads to getting the work done with the organization. Now, this is a background in learning the organizational theories of communication. The three classical theories, I can send you a bit of a handout for you to read. The book, which is obviously available on Moodle, has a chapter on this, which will be a good read, about a good 20 pages to understand, and that will also help you directly cover the task 4.2, which is given in the assignment. So some of these theories over the years, have been, this is the classical, these are the classical theories, but some of the theories have, changed, and they have, say, for example, different, meaning when it is applied towards, I would say, modern day organizations, and this is something that can be covered for this particular task. Now, let's very briefly look at, communications audit. Now, why is a communications audit done? How is it done? And, why do we need the communication audit within the organization? So any questions on this so far, please feel free to ask me through the chat route, and what I will do is I'll stop the delivery there and then obviously try and answer those questions so that we can clarify some of the doubts with regards to when we are moving ahead. Now, let's look at why is there a need for doing communication audit? When we look at communication audit, sometimes within the organization you want to know that how is the information understood? Why does the communication not happen, or is not understood by some people? So sometimes what you will see is the senior management employ a strategy within the organization to improve communication, and this is done by looking at taking input or feedback and evaluating how the the channels of communication are working through the route called something. Through a route which is something called communication audit. Now, this is a strategic exercise that an organization can do, once a year or once in 3 years. And the idea here is that they want to look at, getting systematic, formal and informal review of how the communication practices are within the organization. Now, in terms of understanding this can be a process which is done in different organizations differently, and sometimes you will see that organizations, they outsource this as an activity to a third-party company. In some cases the HR department does it, in some cases the marketing or PR department does it, because they want to have a good understanding in terms of how the channels of communication are working, and which channel is a preferred channel today when we look at the process of getting or consuming information. In today's world, social media is one of the channels through which a lot of people consume information. You will see technology is an enabler. So a lot of people are consuming information through mobile phone, their tablets, and it is something which all organizations need to look at. So if they have to align reaching out to their customers, what they have to do is in terms of aligning and reaching out to their customers, they have to choose those channels which will allow them to primarily look at a good channel through which they can reach out to most of their customers. Now, what I'm going to do is very briefly show you a template which will allow you to look at doing a communications audit. Now, if you look at this particular template, which I'm going to obviously email over to you, my suggestion would be to try and use this as a template to pick up a company and see what and how you can do the communications audit. The other thing that we have to look at covering, is workplace problems. So there are two templates which I can send across. This is a local, template which has been developed by a company called Marketing Dojo, and they have a bit of an initial opening letter and then some questions which they will send across to all, different stakeholders for them to answer, and then they will tally these answers to see what are the best methods through which they are able to, understand this information. So this is quite a detailed audit, but in some cases, what we have to do is we have to look at defining the methodology, send it across to a number of people, do some interviews or multiple choice questions, and see how the information is understood and what are the various, meanings of this information when we look at their understanding on a situation. So when we look at considering that place would basically look at that process would essentially look at the process of audit. Last but not the least, what we want to understand, how do we improve workplace communication? Now, there are various ways through which we can improve workplace communication, and some of these ways include things like, a lot of companies do surveys to get feedback, and the feedback is primarily collected to see what areas of contention, to see that these do not lead to issues or problems in the future. So you would, as a new technology or a new process being introduced, sometimes you will see that organizations actually put a training process in place for everyone to go through that training to understand the rationale, the logic behind why this new process is being introduced, how it will give streamline some of the other activities which were being done or associated with it, and last but not the least, how it will translate into effectively capturing all the required things and make the process easier, faster, smoother, or say for example in some cases cleaner. So a lot of government departments put a lot of processes in place. They ask you when you go to a website, for example, sometimes you will see the website will when you're closing the website down, they will ask you to basically say, can you participate, essentially capturing how your interaction with the website was. Were you able to find the information? Was the information relevant? And last but not the least, were you able to accomplish what you came in to do on the website, whether it was information form or any sort of say for example complaint that you were trying to raise, and was it addressed? So the idea is, in order to close that loop, they have to look at improving the way the communication is put out, and the communication is put out, and obviously how it helps improve the process. And this is where we look at the last task, which is to understand how do we improve workplace communication by looking at doing surveys, feedbacks, trainings, and obviously generating a consensus in order for us to be able to move forward. So with this, I think we are covering Learning Outcome 4, and this allows us to look at the overarching message of Learning Outcome 4 is to understand the purposes of reviewing the processes within the organization, the communication processes within the organization, and that is primarily done through an audit. And then in order to know some background in terms of why do we study various organizational theories, how they're implemented in the modern day context, we look at the three theories that we've discussed, and I'll send you a bit of a handout on this. And then last but not the least, what we look at is how do we address issues in terms of communication within workplace, and these issues can be addressed through looking at doing surveys, feedbacks, trainings, and consensus amongst the routine in which when the information released, how much is it released, who releases it, and things like that. So I would then very briefly look at going through the assignment brief, so that we can put a handle in terms of what is required to be done in terms of this particular unit. Let me just quickly open the assignment brief. So in the assignment brief, what we are looking at is specifically for learning outcome 4, which is primarily covered in the activity 2. Here, content in the assignment, that what they are asking you to do is you're acting as a training manager. There are some delegates which are coming to the training, and you've been asked to review the delegates training pack. So in order for you to be able to review that training pack, what you're looking at doing is you're doing a communications review or an audit, and that has to be carried within an organization of your choice. You could make a fictitious organization, or you could pick up a company and then do a communications audit in that, and then accomplish and answer the task. So here, the format, I can send you this particular format. You can use one of the formats or a simple one, and then look at basically finding out what do a communications audit. That means how is at different levels and what is the meaning of that information at different levels. So you will use a particular format, questionnaire, to be able to ask certain questions to different people within the organization, management, mid-management, workers, and see if they all have the same understanding. That would help constitute something called the communications audit. Then we cover 3 theories: Taylor's, Files, and Weber's. So basically you will apply one of that theory into the audit that you've done or the organization that you've chosen. And that could be, saying that, okay, it is task-based, prescriptive, descriptive. Does it focus on, what does it focus on, and how that theory relates to the organization. Next task says create a plan which will help you improve workplace communication. So maybe a table like this, which will basically in terms of how that can improve. You could include things like surveys, feedback, consensus, training as a method to improve the process of communication within the company that you have chosen. And lastly, what you have to do is you have to identify measures to evaluate success of that plan. So whatever plan you have developed, what basis the communication, you have to present the same plan once these improvements have been put in place, and how is the plan then adapting to the organization. So maybe a subsequent table which basically allows you to show the changes which have occurred, primarily from a point of view of looking at the accomplishing of that plan. So that will help cover this particular task to the assignment and learning outcome 4 in particular. So if you have any questions or any queries, then please do let me know, and you can ask, so that what we can do is we can discuss. I can obviously send you some additional handouts for you to be able to read and then appropriately address those tasks. Now, one of the key things which I will mention is that when you look at doing the task 4.4, which is evaluate the measures, identify measures to evaluate the success. So here you might need to kind of add your mentions to the policies and processes which have been picked up in the communication audit are not followed, or how the policies and process will be followed in this case for improving the plan of communication in the workplace. And that would basically then put some towards the end. What you will do is you'll put some factors, will define the success rate of that plan. So you'll have to say that if this plan is implemented, it will help in reducing the conflict or misunderstandings in terms of communication within the organization or within a department. It could say that this will involve or then evoke active participation by team members when say, for example, goals are being set, or for example targets are being given. So if it's a sales situation that you're picking up, it could be that in order to get a consensus and in order to make the plan successful for achieving the target for the year, all the sales managers will need to have the same understanding of what the target is, what the major goal has been set within the organization, and how this goal can be achieved. So their understanding of the goal has to be similar, understanding of the target has to be similar, and each and everyone has to contribute to be able to achieve that target, they have to individually achieve their own sales goal. And once they achieve their own sales goals, the overall organization target can be achieved. Now, you could suggest methods like, reduction of conflict would be that each sales manager is given an area or a territory in which they are able to function, and they should not be approaching customers in others' territory, and that would avoid conflict. So these are success measures that you are putting in place, or at least defining that these could be success measures which are required by the sales managers to be able to follow, so that the communication is clear, there are no conflicts, and at the end of it, you're able to achieve your goals. So with this, I'm going to stop here, in terms of today's session. I hope you have understood the details that we've discussed for Learning Outcome 4, and I look forward to receiving the draft of the assignment, within the next week. I know that 27th is bank holiday, so if you can send over a draft of the assignment on the 27th, then I'll be able to look into it and give you some feedback with regards to if there are any changes required. Once again, thanks for the session today, and please expect to get the copy of the recording and the dished short, and we'll also email and put up on the modal. Thank you, and bye for now.